In this episode, we begin with a practical question that matters more than many new learners first realize. How do you know an artificial intelligence, AI, system is actually ready to be released into the real world? Building a model is only part of the story, because a system that works in a lab, in a demo, or in a carefully controlled test may still fail once real people start using it in everyday conditions. Release readiness is the point where an organization steps back and asks whether the system is understandable enough, safe enough, documented enough, and governed well enough to be trusted with a real job. That is where model cards and conformity requirements become especially important, because they help turn a technical project into something decision-makers can evaluate clearly, even if those decision-makers are not data scientists or engineers. For a beginner, the key idea is simple. Release is not just a technical milestone. It is a governance decision, a risk decision, and often a legal and ethical decision as well. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to think about release readiness is to compare it to opening a new bridge to public traffic. The bridge may look complete, the concrete may be dry, and the paint may be finished, but no responsible city would open it just because it appears done from a distance. People want proof that the bridge can carry the expected load, that warning signs are in place, that the design matches the intended use, and that somebody is accountable if problems appear later. AI systems deserve the same kind of disciplined thinking because their failures can affect people's opportunities, privacy, safety, finances, or access to services. Release readiness means the organization has gathered enough evidence to justify use in a specific context, not that the system is perfect. Beginners sometimes imagine readiness as a yes or no judgment based only on accuracy, but the real question is broader. A system can be accurate in one narrow way and still be unready because the team cannot explain its limitations, document its assumptions, or show that it meets the rules that apply to its deployment. One of the most helpful tools for making that broader picture visible is the model card. A model card is a structured document that explains what a model is, what it was designed to do, what data shaped it, how it was evaluated, where it performs well, where it may struggle, and what kinds of use should be approached with caution or avoided altogether. Think of it as a plain language profile of the model rather than a marketing summary. A strong model card does not just celebrate strengths. It also names known weaknesses, boundaries, and conditions that could lead to poor outcomes. That honesty matters because decision-makers need more than good news when they are deciding whether to release a system into a live environment. For new learners, it helps to see the model card as a bridge between technical development and responsible deployment, since it gives engineers, risk teams, compliance staff, product leaders, and executives one shared reference point for discussing the system. The reason model cards matter so much is that AI systems often fail in ways that are not obvious when people only look at performance averages. A model might do well overall while still performing poorly for certain groups, under certain conditions, or when presented with unusual inputs that were not common during development. A model card can capture that context by describing evaluation conditions, dataset characteristics, uncertainty, and any limits on generalization. Without that kind of documentation, teams may assume the system is reliable in places where it has never been meaningfully tested. That is how overconfidence enters the deployment process. New learners should notice that documentation is not paperwork added at the end to satisfy bureaucracy. It is part of understanding the system itself, because writing down intended uses, known limits, and test results often reveals gaps that were easy to ignore when the project was moving quickly and excitement around launch was high. Model cards are also valuable because they help separate intended use from possible use. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them creates many governance problems. A model may have been built to support low-stakes internal prioritization, yet once it exists, someone may want to apply it to hiring, lending, healthcare triage, student evaluation, or other decisions that carry much higher consequences. If the model card clearly defines the intended setting, user population, input conditions, and acceptable decision role of the system, it becomes much easier to prevent careless expansion into harmful contexts. Beginners often hear people describe AI as flexible and reusable, which is true in one sense, but that flexibility can become dangerous when organizations forget that a model's evidence base is tied to particular goals and conditions. Release readiness, therefore, includes checking whether the deployment team actually understands the use boundaries stated in the model card and whether the business plans match those boundaries instead of quietly stretching beyond them. Now we can turn to conformity requirements, which sound formal but rest on a simple idea. Conformity requirements are the expectations an organization must meet to show that a system aligns with the rules, standards, internal controls, and risk conditions that apply before release. Sometimes these requirements come from law or regulation. Sometimes they come from industry expectations, contractual commitments, organizational policies, or internal risk thresholds. In every case, the organization is being asked to demonstrate that the system conforms to what is required rather than merely claiming that it should be fine. That distinction matters because good intentions do not count as evidence. For a beginner, the easiest way to understand conformity is to think of it as a test of fit between the AI system and the environment it is entering. The system must fit the purpose, fit the risk level, fit the obligations of the organization, and fit the safeguards expected by those who will be affected by it. Conformity requirements usually force teams to answer questions they may otherwise postpone. What is the exact purpose of this system in deployment, and who decided that purpose? What evidence shows that the system performs acceptably for that purpose? What known risks remain, and are they tolerable in light of the expected benefits? What human oversight exists if something goes wrong, if outputs appear suspicious, or if the system faces a situation outside its design assumptions? What records exist to support review, challenge, audit, or incident response later? These are not abstract governance concerns floating above the technology. They are part of determining whether release would be responsible. New learners sometimes assume that conformity is mostly a legal review done by somebody else at the end, but strong organizations treat it as a cross-functional readiness process involving technical staff, legal review, product leadership, risk owners, compliance teams, security teams, and sometimes affected business units or user-facing groups as well. A helpful way to connect model cards and conformity requirements is to see the model card as a source of evidence for conformity decisions. The model card does not automatically prove the system is compliant or safe, but it gives reviewers a disciplined place to find the facts they need. It can show what data categories were involved, what performance metrics were used, what fairness concerns were examined, what limitations were observed, what assumptions shaped the evaluation, and what uses are out of scope. From there, conformity reviewers can compare those facts against the obligations that apply to the deployment. If the system will influence people's opportunities, reviewers may look harder at bias, explainability, contestability, and oversight. If the system will be customer-facing, they may focus more on transparency, disclosure, reliability, and complaint handling. If it will process sensitive information, privacy and security controls become central. The model card is not the whole readiness package, but without it, conformity review becomes much weaker because the people making release decisions lack a shared, grounded description of the model they are being asked to approve. Another important part of release readiness is recognizing that performance claims must be tied to real conditions, not ideal ones. A model may have been evaluated on clean data, stable inputs, and carefully labeled examples, but deployment rarely stays that tidy for long. Real users make mistakes, unexpected edge cases appear, language shifts, data sources change, and systems interact with messy organizational processes. A strong readiness assessment therefore asks whether the evidence captured in the model card still supports expected performance under realistic operating conditions. Conformity review should also ask whether the organization has tested for foreseeable misuse, adversarial behavior, or simple misunderstanding by ordinary users. New learners should understand that many failures are not dramatic attacks. They are routine mismatches between how designers imagine use and how people actually behave. That is why release readiness depends on humility. The team must resist the temptation to confuse a successful build with a safe launch, because the world outside development rarely behaves as neatly as the training environment. Readiness also depends on the quality of human oversight surrounding the system. Even when an organization says that a human is in the loop, that phrase can hide weak practice if the human reviewer has too little time, too little context, or too much trust in the machine's output. A conformity assessment should therefore examine not only whether people are present, but whether they are equipped to intervene meaningfully. Are they trained to understand the kinds of errors the model can make? Do they know when the output should be questioned or overridden? Is escalation clear when the system behaves oddly or when harmful patterns appear? A model card can support this by describing known limitations and warning conditions in terms that operational teams can actually use. For a beginner, one of the most important lessons is that governance is not only about the model. It is about the whole socio-technical system around the model, including people, processes, authority, accountability, and the practical ability to stop or correct the system when necessary. Transparency is another major reason model cards matter at release time. Different audiences need different levels of explanation, but almost every responsible deployment requires some way to communicate what the system does and what its limits are. Internal reviewers need enough detail to make release decisions. Operators need enough detail to use the system responsibly. Customers or affected individuals may need understandable disclosures about the role of AI in decisions or interactions that concern them. Regulators, auditors, or external assessors may need records showing how the organization evaluated the system before release. The model card supports all of these needs by creating a foundation of documented truth that can be adapted for different audiences without changing the underlying facts. Beginners should notice that transparency is not the same as publishing every technical detail to the public. It means being able to explain the system honestly, at the right level, to the people who need that explanation in order to trust, challenge, govern, or safely use the system. Release readiness also includes a decision about residual risk, which means the risk that remains even after controls, testing, and documentation are in place. No non-trivial AI system is completely free of risk, so the question becomes whether the remaining risk is understood, documented, accepted by the right authority, and monitored after launch. This is where many organizations struggle, because the pressure to release can make uncertainty feel inconvenient rather than informative. A mature team does not hide unresolved issues behind vague optimism. It identifies what is still uncertain, what could go wrong, how serious those harms could be, and what contingency plans exist if real-world behavior turns out worse than expected. A model card contributes by naming limitations instead of burying them. Conformity requirements contribute by forcing the organization to decide whether those limitations are acceptable in this use case. For beginners, this is a crucial governance lesson. Readiness is not the absence of doubt. It is the presence of informed, accountable judgment under conditions that can be defended later. It is also important to understand that release readiness is not a one-person sign-off. While one executive or risk owner may have final authority, good release decisions depend on contributions from multiple functions that see different parts of the problem. Engineering may understand model behavior and technical debt. Security may identify abuse paths or system weaknesses. Privacy teams may recognize sensitive data issues. Legal and compliance teams may map obligations and exposure. Product and operational teams may understand how the system will actually be used under business pressure. Frontline staff may notice usability problems or decision bottlenecks that others miss. The model card helps these groups work from a common factual baseline, while conformity requirements give them a common decision frame. New learners should remember that governance is strongest when it combines these viewpoints rather than treating release as a narrow technical checkpoint. Many serious failures happen because one group knew something important, but the organization lacked the process or documentation needed to bring that knowledge into the final release decision. A common misconception is that model cards and conformity checks slow innovation for no good reason. In reality, they often speed up sustainable deployment by making hidden issues visible before they become public failures, legal problems, or trust crises. A rushed release may feel faster in the short term, but if the system harms users, produces unreliable outcomes, or violates obligations, the organization may spend far more time repairing damage, explaining decisions, or withdrawing the system after launch. Readiness documentation helps prevent that cycle by turning excitement into evidence. It also improves institutional memory because future teams can see why the system was approved, what conditions were attached to its use, and what limits were already known at release time. For a beginner, this point matters because cybersecurity and AI governance are not about saying no to technology. They are about helping organizations say yes responsibly, with a record that shows why release made sense and what protections were considered necessary. As we close, the big idea to carry forward is that releasing an AI system is not merely the moment when development ends. It is the moment when the organization must prove to itself, and sometimes to others, that it understands what the system is, what it is for, what it can do well, where it may fail, and what rules or risk conditions must be satisfied before people are exposed to its effects. Model cards make that understanding visible by documenting intended use, evaluation results, limitations, and assumptions in a form that many stakeholders can engage with. Conformity requirements turn that documentation into a disciplined release decision by asking whether the system actually fits the legal, ethical, organizational, and operational environment it is entering. When beginners understand these two ideas together, they start to see AI governance more clearly. Good release readiness is not about perfect certainty. It is about informed evidence, clear accountability, honest documentation, and a defensible decision that the system should enter the real world under conditions the organization is prepared to support.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.